Across innumerable star systems, the Galactic Commandos were the undisputed elite of the cosmos. They were known as associated with victory. No adversary has ever resisted them for an extended period of time. They were an unstoppable force in every battle thanks to their advanced weapons, cutting-edge technology, and unwavering training. They battled not just once, but completely controlled each other, and their superiority was unquestionable. Without a doubt, when they focused on Earth, they were more than just troops. They were symbols of power. Was mostly forgotten, and the tiny blue planet was regarded as a mere speck in reports of the galaxy. To the Commandos, Earth's military power were absurd. The SAS and other special forces were written off as inflated tales that claimed humans were dependent on primitive creatures, on antiquated equipment and simple tactics. The notion of an Earth-based force contesting their supremacy was so ridiculous that it became a common joke among them. A tiny rebellion had lately brought Earth into intergalactic politics. Transgerm cells had caught the attention of the Galactic Council, who sent the Commandos to put an end to the disruption, supposing it to be merely a training exercise for the Commandos. Drill in which the Commandos joked about the primitive apes as their ships got closer to Earth's orbit. They had been informed on Earth's capabilities by the galactic military chiefs they would shortly encounter, but these merely served to confirm their contempt that intergalactic thought Earth's arsenal was out of date. Extolled guerrilla combatants, and for the Commandos, the question was not whether they would prevail, but rather, how soon? Their goal was simple: protect the area, show off their strength, and remind Earth of its role in the destruction. In order to manage the issue, the galactic leadership planned to send out a tiny squad. With this degree of confidence, they felt that even a little portion of their strength would be sufficient, and that force wasn't needed. Bordered on conceit, but nobody questioned it, because history had repeatedly shown them to be correct. Earth. The announcement of the Galactic Command method sparked conflicting responses, and nations rushed to evaluate the threat, while people were overcome with a mixture of awe and dread at the SAS, but had a different perspective on the matter. To them, it wasn't about awe or fear, it was about getting ready, as opposed to the Commandos, who had no illusions about prowess. They had already triumphed over tremendous odds, not thanks to advanced technology, but due to the SAS's training discipline and flexibility. There was no doubt their prowess, and their elite agents get ready for the task with a calm resolve and no panic. Experience-driven attention to detail, they recognized the risks, but the Commandos viewed Earth as a safe haven. The SAS understood that their survival in the backwaters was dependent on taking advantage of every advantage, no matter how minor. Terrain, the element of surprise, and the capacity for instantaneous adaptation were their armaments, while the Galactic Commandos completed their preparations. The plan was to launch a swift and forceful attack to eliminate any opposition they anticipated from Earth's forces, to disperse at the first indication of their supreme strength. For them, this wasn't only a conflict, but a demonstration in order to convey to the galaxy that even the smallest indication of disobedience would be destroyed without mercy. They possessed drones that could scout whole areas in a matter of minutes, with armor that was almost impenetrable and weapons that could destroy targets from miles away. They believed they were unbeatable, and the idea that a single agent or even a small team might be a danger to them was unthinkable. And when the Commandos arrived on the planet, they were astounded by the Earth's defenses. Are simple and include radar systems, fighter jets, and missiles. They chuckled among themselves with confidence, considering batteries and tools to be remnants of a bygone period. Their conceit prevented them from seeing that Earth's armies would be overpowered before they even realized what was happening. The SAS operative knows that technology by itself does not win fights. Selected for the task was solely focused on the mission and showed little interest in the Commandos' boasts or comments, had researched their strategies, their advantages and their disadvantages. But the Commandos rejected. He viewed Earth's forces as unimportant and seized the chance presented by their arrogance because he was more familiar with the area. The environment was created for him to take advantage of their dependence on technology and use it against them more effectively than they ever could. For a battle the commandos had never encountered before, they thought, thanks to being ready for anything, they were going to receive a harsh lesson. Earth's special forces weren't dependent on. Instead of using fancy technology or advanced weapons, they relied on strategy, tenacity, and an unwillingness to back down against all odds. As the Galactic commandos readied up to strike, they continued to be mocking and conceited, seeing this mission as merely a formality and an opportunity. They were going to have to face a reality they could never have in order to add another simple victory to their record. Expected Earth's SAS to be more than just a military unit. They were a living evidence of the strength of resilience and adaptation traits that will soon test everything the Federation alone could never see in an SAS agent of this type. Even though they used brute force and cutting-edge technology, he used strategies that kept him undetectable to their advanced sensors, and his instruction placed a strong emphasis on accuracy and inventiveness. Not only physical prowess or firepower, but every action and choice was purposefully planned to take advantage of excellence and valuable time. I, too, am one of the few brute force artisans in the nation. In their preparation, the commandos disregarded the terrain and undervalued it. However, he was more aware that every rock, tree, and shadow could be a tool. He examined their movements and the ways in which they expressed their reliance on advanced application. They were predictable because of technology, and their conceit made them oblivious to small changes in their environment, providing him with a benefit they were unable to predict. And when the commanders moved forward, they overlooked the tiny disturbances in their systems, interference with their drones, and unaccountable problems with their communications, delayed, and their supplies appeared to run out more quickly than they had anticipated. These were small annoyances that might have been caused by regional circumstances. Didn't know they were being followed at all times, and the agent had already started, demolishing their piece by bit. His first goal was to cause so much confusion that he interfered with their supply chains, making it hard for them to continue operating. A cargo is missing here, destroyed some equipment there. It wasn't enough for them directly, but it made them slow down. Reacted as expected, relying more on technology to address these problems, which only made them more vulnerable. The commanders were unable to recognize the pattern and blamed these failures on unanticipated poor luck. When they faced a lone let agent, his next tactic was psychological, something the commandos were accustomed to. The intricacy of his strategies caught their adversaries off guard, and he played on their presumptions. Any signs that indicated a more powerful force was at work, a damaged branch here, a footprint there, was sufficient to cause them to question their environment. Their self-assurance started to falter, even though they would never acknowledge it. For the first time, they had to face the possibility that they might not have total authority over the commanders. Tried to adjust, but their reliance on technology made their efforts awkward, was both their largest advantage and disadvantage. They increased the number of drones they used to search for signs of activity, but the agent took advantage of their presence by guiding them into regions where the terrain cooperated against them, requiring them to need resources and energy simply to go through the process, resulting in sometimes extremely painful slow jams. Around all of these efforts were outside security, and most of the commandos lost. In one step ahead of their moves, but before they could respond, their annoyance escalated. The commandos' discipline deteriorated, and they started making mistakes and taking chances that they would. Normally, the operative would not have taken advantage of these errors with precision hitting. He didn't have to confront them directly when they were most at risk. Instead, he chose to let them. Hasta Elise. The commandos finally recognized that they were not facing a common adversary. They began to doubt their preconceived notions about Earth's military capacities. They weren't the subject of a disjointed resistance or a fortunate string of events. With a degree of proficiency that was comparable to their own, the insight arrived too late. The operator had already changed the balance of power by the time they realized the threat, and he picked his moments. Although he rarely engaged in carefully direct confrontations, when he did, it was devastating. Each battle strengthened the speed and accuracy, leaving no time for retribution. The notion that they were surpassed not by technology or quantity, but rather by sheer skill, the commandos started to question their dominance, something they had never considered before the SAS. The operator maintained his composure the entire time, realizing that his strength was his capacity for patience and adaptation. Commandos found it difficult to adapt since he thrived on uncertainty. Each action he took was a step closer to his objective. He was rewriting the commandos' rules of engagement rather than merely engaging in combat. Believed they were invincible when they started this battle, but the longer the conflict lasted, the more obvious it was that the agent had command of the commandos' cutting-edge technology. Their greatest strength turned into a weakness, forcing them to doubt their strategies, tools, and even the operative's intuition had revealed the weaknesses in their system, transforming their strengths against them. This wasn't merely a fight of fire or stamina. Power was a test of the SAS operative's tactics and fortitude, reflected in all of his actions. He didn't battle to establish a point or win fame. The Galactic Commander's objective was to simply safeguard Earth at any costs, for all their power had misjudged the difficulty of confronting someone who had nothing to lose by the harm had already been done, and the commandos' confidence was weakened when they got back together to reevaluate their circumstances. They had arrived on Earth with their ranks exhausted and their supplies stretched low, expecting a straightforward victory. But they were suddenly engaged in a conflict they hadn't expected, and the SAS agent had turned the tide, demonstrated that Earth's defenders should not be undervalued. And the SAS agent had changed the balance of power so that the Galactic Commandos were unable to anticipate or regulate every choice he took, advantage of their antimatter motivations, and each move pushed them into circumstances that deprived them of their They were used to using superior technology to overpower adversaries. Firepower, but they now had to contend with an attrition battle in which their reliance on technology only strengthened their vulnerability. The commandos' operative approach changed as they employed their sophisticated tracking systems against them, setting up ruses to distract them as he stayed hidden when their sensors detected erroneous transmissions, redirecting their resources to explore, only to discover barren land or potential dangers. This persistent diversion kept them tense, lowering their spirits and interfering with their coordination. The commandos' efforts to recover leadership exposed their technological shortcomings. To sweep the region, they used upgraded drones, although these devices were set up for large-scale operations. The operator took advantage of the fact that they were now facing precision techniques by combining into the surroundings, employing straightforward yet efficient methods to stay undetected. Their sophisticated scanners were unable to identify a weakness that emphasized their over-reliance on automation. As the worker tightened his control of the situation, the commandos started to rebel against themselves. This uncertainty resulted in disagreements on how some argued that in order to move forward, brute force should use its most damaging weaponry to clear the area. But some urged prudence out of concern about potential traps. The operatives' formerly unbreakable discipline and cracks were directly impacted by this internal discord, expanded, further undermining their efficacy, and the commandos' psychological toll became apparent. Unaccustomed to extended battles in which the enemy set the rules of battle, their training placed more emphasis on quick wins than protracted conflicts. When they had to modify the operatives, they began to doubt their own choices due to constant pressure, which he took advantage of at every turn. Opportunity, but by the time they got back together, their self-confidence was only a shell of what it had been. Commandos increased their resources for the task, since they wouldn't concede defeat, sending out specialist teams to find the operative. These troops had improved armor, advanced artificial intelligence support, and even these reinforcements were defeated by his tactics. Despite the fact that the weaponry were made for close-quarters battle, used confined confines and environmental dangers to entice individuals into places where their advantages were negated. Their advantages into disadvantages, and the commandos' attempts to strike back only served to situation. The agent foresaw their movements and reacted precisely each time they tried a counterattack. He had already left when they began an onslaught, leaving confusion and mayhem in their wake. Positions, avoiding them completely, and targeting weak spots in their supply chains. Every action they took appeared to play right into his hands, and as their frustration increased with every unsuccessful attempt to corner him, they started to defend their decision to overextend themselves by dividing their forces in order to cover more ground. Instead, they made themselves easier targets by splitting their strength. Operatives used surgical precision to take advantage of these divisions, destroying isolated troops and severely depressing their morale. The commandos miscalculated the desperate struggle for existence that had evolved from what had begun as a mission to establish their supremacy, the value of flexibility in the face of their strict and regimented training. Focusing on improvisation, he made their reliance on procedure a vulnerability by compelling them to protect them. By continuing to be unpredictable, they were able to enter settings where their usual strategies were unsuccessful. As the battle continued, he kept the advantage, making it impossible for anyone to completely predict what he would do. The operative's actions escalated, and he started eliminating key personnel. Removing seasoned commanders from the equation, which not only upended their command structure but also strengthened the feeling of grip they had already gone through. Without their leaders, the commanders struggled to keep their ranks cohesive, which made them even more incompetent to work against. The way the commander's utilization of the terrain peaked, leaving them open to his strikes, used natural elements to trap and confuse his opponents, transforming the surroundings into a weapon. In addition to facing an invisible foe, commandos had to contend with the environment they had written off as unimportant. Every hill, ravine, and wooded area turned into a potential threat, compelling them to second-guess their every action. But the operative's targeting of their supply was the turning point. Depot's capacity to continue the task without access to supplies was severely damaged when he struck at their logistical core. Vital supplies and their advanced equipment, which the commandos had previously been confident in, became a burden instead of an asset. Now that their resources were running low, their invincibility had to face the harsh reality of their predicament. By the end of this phase, the commandos' morale was completely destroyed, and their enemies showed no signs of weakness. A ghost of their former selves. Their dread and doubt had taken the place of their once flawless coordination. Their greatest power, superior technology, has been rendered useless by the operatives. Ingenuity. They had gone into the conflict hoping for a swift and clear victory, but now they were only engaged in combat. The goal of the SAS operating strategy was to expose the shortcomings in the commandos, not only to triumph. Approach to warfare, he had shown that no amount of training or technology could make up for. Despite their great strength, the commandos had undervalued the ability to adapt and be resilient. Despite their ingenuity and perseverance, it was too late to recover when they realized their error. The Galactic commanders were pushed to the limit of their endurance during the last stages of the battle, which they had not anticipated. Their adversary, who had initially dismissed Earth's capabilities as archaic, now confronted a situation that endangered not only their goal, but also their standing as the galaxy's elite. In spite of their defeats and diminishing morale, refusing to concede defeat, and preparing for a decisive battle with the goal of regaining, the SAS operative recognized their might and agreed to terminate the conflict on their terms. And it's evident that the commandos still had a lot of resources at their desperation and disposal, which increased the risk of their advanced weapons, and even the most proficient operator may be overwhelmed by their sheer numbers, and equipment continued to pose a serious hazard, forcing them into a scenario where their technological advantages were essential in order to ensure victory. Completely destroyed, the operational plan was to move the conflict to an area that favored his strategy. He picked a spot where the commandos' bulky gear would be problematic, a place that needed The battlefield selection was purposefully made to deprive them of flexibility and fast thinking, their residual self-assurance, and revealed their dependence on rigid strategies. As the commandos advanced into battle, every detail was planned to maximize his own advantages and take advantage of their shortcomings. Positioned, they brought their most powerful weapons with the intention of overwhelming any opposition. Their plan was obvious: complete frontal attack to overpower their adversary. They thought brute force could prevail where their prior attempts had failed because they neglected to take into consideration the operative's capacity to predict every action they made. The operator used preparations to turn their aggression into a disadvantage by exploiting their own momentum against them. Of traps and deception peaked during this phase, and the commandos ran into difficulties everywhere they looked. From deliberately placed ambushes to destroyed equipment, these interruptions hindered their progress and compelled them to use resources and effort simply to stay on path. They started to see that each action they took led them farther into an unfamiliar situation. Unwilling to acknowledge the idea of failure, they persisted despite their growing displeasure, and the interaction intensified as the commanders advanced. They used every weapon in their arsenal, including advanced surveillance and powerful energy weapons, including advanced aerodynamic systems, but the operative had a backup plan in place for every action they took. Turned their drones against them, interfered with their targeting systems, and used their own weaponry to cause mayhem. In the commandos, who had previously been so sure of their dominance, were now struggling to keep their unity. The commandos' pligmooch was made much more difficult by the unpredictable nature of the operative's methods. He deviated from standard procedures, making it practically difficult for any non-combination teams to alert the enemy that approaching securities was likely to be implicated. Every time they believed they had him surrounded, he slipped away, leaving them with nothing. And they had to guess what he would do next. But bewilderment and increasing feeling of unease, their sophisticated AI systems are made to evaluate and counter adversary tactics, were unable to keep up with his creativity, which led to the commandos launched a final onslaught after a direct clash that pushed both sides to their limits. They thought that by putting all of their resources into a focused attack, pure force would eventually prevail. Their opponent instead, and they were constantly outwitted. He had an advantage they couldn't match because of his knowledge of the brain and his capacity for real-time adaptation. The commandos' advanced armor was taken away from them one by one. Once believed to be impenetrable, their weaponry were shown to be susceptible to precise and well-planned strikes. Therefore, in the restricted and uncertain setting the operator had selected, something that was effective in open combat became unmanageable. Even their numbers, which ought to have provided them with a decisive edge, turned against them as they found it difficult to synchronize their activities. The operative's capacity to maintain composure under duress stood in sharp contrast to the commandos. Growing desperation as they became more hostile and careless, yet he stayed concentrated and methodical, aiming to outthink and outlast them in every action rather than directly overpowering them. His actions were intended to provide an opportunity to strike a final blow that would put an end to the battle permanently. The commandos were forced to face the truth of their circumstances as the conflict approached its CL finale, to Earth anticipating a simple victory, only to be vanquished by a single whistleblower. Their training and technology, which had hitherto ensured success, were no match for his. They had underestimated Earth's defenders' agility and tenacity, and it ultimately cost them everything. But the SAS agent emerged victorious not because of greater firepower or cutting-edge equipment, but because, to his capacity for unconventional thinking, he had shown that the Galactic Commandos' ingenuity and tenacity could bring down even the most powerful force. The most feared warriors in the galaxy fled Earth in defeat, their reputations destroyed, and the operation's triumph was not only was it a victory for Earth, but it also taught the galaxy that power alone cannot ensure resilience. Adaptability and success plan are just as crucial, if not more so, than the cosmic victories, the commandos had misjudged the potential of humanity by underestimating their opponent. Although the fight was done, its effects will last well beyond Earth's borders. The fallout from the Galactic Commando was devastated by the war. Their loss on Earth was not only a military setback, but also a shock to their galaxy. For generations, their collective ego had been the most feared force in the galaxy. Unbeaten and uncontested, they now returned to their fleet with broken confidence that was compelled. The Commandos' top command gathered to help them reconcile their conceit with the reality they had just encountered. Discuss the mission in order to comprehend how one person brought their forces to their knees. Their initial research concentrated on tactical mistakes that the Commandos had made, relying largely on technology and raw might in the hopes that they would ensure their triumph. They discovered too late that with each assumption they made, their adversary had transformed their strengths into weaknesses. The SAS agent had been mistaken about Earth's capabilities and had not engaged them on their terms. Instead, he had changed the rules of engagement. The Commandos had to acknowledge that their strict tactics and adversarial savagery, their downfall, had been overconfidence. And this loss also sparked more general concerns about how they handled. Although the Galactic Commandos had always considered technology to be the best option, this conflict had revealed its shortcomings, showing that superior firepower and advanced technology were insufficient. Confronting a foe who knew how to take advantage of weaknesses in their strategy, the Commandos' reliance on their strategy in the procedures they generally used. The success demonstrated the SAS operative's effectiveness and was a reflection of innovation. He had relied on adaptation in the concepts that characterized Earth's special forces. Resourcefulness and an unwavering will to achieve his goals was based on the capacity for critical thought and decisive action, rather than sophisticated equipment or overwhelming might. These attributes had enabled him to overcome what seemed to be insurmountable obstacles under pressure, and showed that the Commandos had taken on the importance of the war even though Earth's defenders were far from the primitive forces, traveled swiftly beyond Earth's boundaries, and word of the Commandos' loss. For many, discovering other worlds and civilizations served as a reminder or a moment of validation that even the Earth's triumph over its most formidable enemies became a symbol of defiance that gave rise to optimism. It marked a sea change for those who had long been subjected to the militaristic domination of the Galactic Council. Power dynamics transforming Earth's image from a minor backwater to a powerhouse deserving of reverence. While the triumph of the SAS operatives was lauded, the combat itself served as a wake-up call, emphasized the necessity of readiness, and the world's leaders acknowledged the increasing significance of relationships between galaxies, possible dangers, defense diplomacy investments, and prioritizing technical innovation. Earth's military started working with scientists and engineers should create systems that will enhance its special forces' inventiveness without compromising the flexibility that had made the Galactic Commandos so successful. Faced an internal reckoning in the interim, and its leaders initiated a thorough evaluation of their training tactics and operational frameworks. They understood that their loss was due to more than just a competence of a single opponent, but a systematic inability to adjust to new challenges. This insight led to a change in their philosophy that prioritizes critical thinking, flexibility, above heedless reliance on technology, and they started researching the strategies employed by Earth's military in an effort to comprehend and apply the very techniques that had vanquished them. However, many Commandos members opposed this change, found it difficult to acknowledge the shortcomings of their conventional approaches, as their society had long been based on the notion. Acknowledging fragility and letting go of supremacy was a tough pill to take, but the proof was unquestionably, the activities of the SAS operatives had shown flaws that could no longer be disregarded. Reform was not just essential, the SAS operative's mission's conclusion was unavoidable. He came back to Earth as a hero at the start of a new chapter, yet he maintained his usual humility until For him, the mission had always been about defending his planet and proving that, not about achieving personal glory. Resilience tactics and the capacity for silent adaptation were the sources of strength. Learned from the conflict and went back to work, readying himself for whatever obstacles lay ahead. The Galactic Council was forced to reevaluate its governance strategy after their most elite force was defeated. In military action, Earth's surprising triumph served as a reminder that even the most developed societies could not afford to undervalue other people's potential. Whilst an appeal for increased cooperation and respect for one another, although not all council members agreed with this, Earth found itself in a peculiar situation as the galaxy considered the ramifications of the Commando's failure. The planet was now acknowledged as a participant on the galactic scene and no longer viewed as a mere observer in intergalactic affairs. Obviously, there were both opportunities and difficulties associated with this new status. Other planets started to make diplomatic approaches in an effort to form alliances, and, at the same time, partnerships need Earth to manage the dangers of drawing more attention from those who would. Perceive its growing might as a danger, the conflict also caused a change in Earth's employment. A moment of solidarity and a reminder that the planet's survival depends on global consciousness relied on teamwork. Politicians, scientists, and military leaders started collaborating more, acutely understanding the necessity of striking a balance between innovation and human timeless traits. The success of the SAS operatives served as motivation and was narrated not only as a military triumph, but as evidence of the strength of resiliency and flexibility, the galactic ethic. The loss of the Commando was more than just one incident. It marked a sea change in intergalactic history. Relationships, it questioned established notions of supremacy and power, compelling even the most developed. It was a time for civilizations to reconsider their goals for the planet. It served as a reminder of pride and a chance to steer the galaxy in a different direction. That strength lies not only in numbers or technology, but also in the capacity to innovate, adapt, and persist. Persisting would allow generations to learn from the war and shape the future in ways that no one else had expected.